When I entered the house, the alien woman panicked. "Mother, the human is here." The one who saved Marcus's boots thudded against the ground as he entered the small, quiet house. He had been walking for hours after being separated from his team. The alien planet was vast, unfamiliar, and hostile, but his training kept him steady. He hoped to find shelter, maybe even some information about how to contact his people or get to safety. As he stepped through the door, the sound of his footsteps echoed in the empty room. The house was peaceful, filled with soft alien lights that cast a warm glow over the strange decorations that lined the walls. It seemed like any normal home, though it was far from human. At first, there was no movement, no sound, just the eerie quiet of the planet. Then from the shadows, a woman appeared. She was unlike anything Marcus had seen before. Her skin was smooth and shimmering with shades of blue, and her eyes, bright, shimmering like the stars, were wide with fear. She froze as Marcus stepped further into the room, eyes locking onto him. There was something deeply unsettling about her reaction. She backed away, her feet brushing softly against the ground as if trying to make herself invisible. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Instead, she whispered something, barely audible, but Marcus caught it. "Mother, the human is here." The panic in her voice was clear. Marcus felt his brow furrow, confusion sweeping over him. He raised a hand in peace, taking another step forward. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not here to hurt anyone. I'm just lost. I need help." But the woman, Nira, he guessed from the look of panic in her eyes, did not seem to hear him. Her gaze shifted over his shoulder as though something far worse than him was coming. Her voice trembled again as she turned and fled down a hallway. Before Marcus could react, another figure appeared in the doorway. This one was different, taller, more composed, a figure of authority. Her posture was strong, proud, but her eyes, too, held a depth of weariness, like someone who had lived through more battles than most could ever imagine. She was older, perhaps a mother, and as she saw Marcus standing in her home, her eyes narrowed. "What is this?" Her voice was calm but filled with a quiet strength. "What are you doing here, human?" Marcus raised his hands in a gesture of non-aggression. "I'm just lost. My ship crashed and I ended up here. I didn't mean to intrude." The woman's eyes scanned him, searching for lies. There were none. She seemed to make a decision in that moment, something subtle in her gaze. "You are not welcome here," she said quietly but firmly, taking a step toward him. Before Marcus could respond, Nira appeared again, but this time she wasn't alone. She was holding something in her hand, a strange, glowing device. She approached cautiously, eyes flickering between Marcus and her mother. The two seemed to be communicating silently, their eyes meeting in understanding. Zalaria, the older woman, turned back to Marcus. "Leave now, and I will forget that you've entered my home. I am a woman of peace, but I do not trust your kind." Marcus felt his chest tighten at her words. Her eyes held a history, something he couldn't understand yet, but it was clear that his presence here stirred something painful in her. "You should know that I was saved once by a human soldier," Zalaria continued, her tone shifting as she spoke. "Many years ago in a war long past, he fought with honor and he saved my life." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a more personal level. "That soldier's actions saved me from a fate worse than death. But my people—" She looked away for a moment, as if the words were difficult to speak. "My people had their reasons for waging war on humans. We were wrong, but the guilt still lingers." Marcus's mind spun with her words. A human soldier had saved her. Why was she so distrustful of him then? And why did she refer to him as her kind with such bitterness? He was about to ask more when Nira suddenly gasped. She turned her gaze to the window, her eyes widening in terror. "Mother," she whispered, "they've found us." Zalaria looked out the window, her expression turning cold. "No," she murmured, clenching her fists. The warmth that had been in the room moments ago evaporated, replaced by tension and fear. Without another word, Zalaria motioned for Marcus to follow her. "Come with me, human. I'll explain later, but right now you need to be somewhere safe." Marcus had no choice but to follow. He didn't know what was happening, but he could see the urgency in Zalaria's movements. Nira, now visibly shaking, hurried ahead, leading the way to a hidden room in the back of the house. As they entered the room, Zalaria finally turned to Marcus. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into, human," she said quietly. "This house, this place, it was supposed to be a refuge from my past, but I see now that you are no ordinary human." Her gaze softened slightly. "And it is no coincidence that you've arrived at this moment. You've come here for a reason." Marcus was silent, still trying to piece everything together. He felt as if he had been dropped into the middle of a story he didn't understand, with pieces that didn't fit yet. Nira, still trembling, sat down in the corner, holding her knees close to her chest. "Why are you here?" she asked him, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Marcus admitted, feeling the weight of her gaze. "I didn't mean to come here, I'm just looking for answers. My ship crashed, I didn't know anyone lived here." Zalaria's eyes softened, but her resolve remained. "You are safe for now, but you must understand that you have come at the worst possible time. My past is closing in on me. My people, the ones who once stood against your kind, they are still hunting me. They've never forgotten the war, and they never will." Marcus swallowed. "Then why help me?" he asked, genuinely confused. "Why not just send me away?" Zalaria looked at him with a mixture of sadness and regret. "Because," she said, "there was a time when your kind saved me, and I owe you. I owe your people more than I can ever repay, but now we must survive together." The house was still. The quiet felt oppressive, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Marcus sat on the cold, stone floor of the hidden room, trying to gather his thoughts. Zalaria and Nira stood by the doorway, their eyes focused on something distant, lost in their own thoughts. The silence stretched between them. Marcus didn't know what to say. He had only wanted to survive, to find his way back to safety. Instead, he had found a strange alien woman whose past intertwined with humanity's history in a way he couldn't understand. Her people had been at war with humans, yet she had been saved by one, and now she seemed to be asking for help. Zalaria broke the silence, her voice calm but filled with a weight of regret. "You don't understand the danger you're in, human. You came here at the worst possible time." She crossed the room slowly, her eyes watching the shadows outside the window. "My past is coming for me." Marcus stood up, moving cautiously toward her. "What do you mean? Who's coming for you, and why me?" Zalaria looked at him, her eyes dark with a history that was too heavy to share all at once. "I wasn't always the woman you see now. I was once part of a powerful military faction. We fought alongside many others, waging wars, taking planets. But then," she hesitated, swallowing hard. "Then I saw what we were doing, what we were becoming, and I couldn't be a part of it anymore." Nira, who had been silent until now, spoke up, her voice small and trembling. "Mother, you don't have to tell him all of this." Zalaria placed a hand gently on Nira's shoulder, her touch reassuring but heavy with the burden of her past. "I must, my daughter, he needs to understand." She turned back to Marcus. "I was a soldier, just like the ones hunting me now. I fought alongside them and we destroyed everything in our path. But then, I defected. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't watch innocent lives be lost for nothing. And that's when I met your kind." Marcus looked at her, confused but intrigued. "What happened?" Zalaria's face softened for a moment, her eyes distant, as if remembering a time long gone. "I was injured in one of the battles, left for dead by my own people. It was a human soldier who found me. He saved my life, treated my wounds, and carried me to safety. He didn't care that I was an enemy. He didn't care about the war. He only cared about helping me, and for that I owe him everything." Marcus's mind raced. This was the human who had saved her. The human she had spoken of. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. This wasn't just a war story. This was something much more personal. "So you're telling me that a human soldier saved your life?" Marcus asked, his voice quiet. "And now you trust me because of that?" Zalaria nodded, her expression somber. "In some ways, yes. But it's not that simple. My people, those who I once called allies, they don't forget. They never forget." Nira stepped forward, her voice shaking. "The war, it changed everything. Our people have been hunting my mother for years. They want her back, and now with you here. It complicates things." Marcus felt the weight of her words. He wasn't just caught in some random fight. He was in the middle of something far bigger than himself. These alien soldiers, whatever their motives, would come for Zalaria. And if they came for her, they would come for him, too. Zalaria turned away from them, staring out the window into the dark sky. "They're here," she whispered. "They've arrived sooner than I thought." Marcus moved toward the window, his gaze following hers. In the distance, he could see shapes in the sky, dark, looming ships that moved like shadows across the stars. The enemy had arrived, just as Zalaria had feared. His heart raced. There was no time to waste. He had to act, and he had to do it fast. "We have to leave." "Now," Marcus said, his voice firm. He turned to Zalaria. "Where's the nearest escape route?" Zalaria looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and gratitude. "There's a tunnel beneath the house. It leads to the outer caves, but it's dangerous." The tunnels are old and they've been sealed off for years. Marcus nodded, already moving toward the door. I don't care, we don't have time for that, let's go. Nira followed close behind him, her feet barely making a sound on the stone floor. Zalaria was slower, still standing by the window, watching the ship's approach. Marcus reached for her arm, gently pulling her away from the window. Come on, we don't have time, he urged. Zalaria took one last look out the window, then nodded. You're right, let's go. The three of them moved quickly through the house, making their way down the narrow hallway. Nira led the way, her small hands quickly finding a hidden lever in the wall. She pulled it and a section of the floor slid open, revealing a narrow stairway that descended into the darkness below. Marcus hesitated for a moment, looking back at the house one last time. This place, this home, was about to be lost to the past. But he didn't have time to mourn. There were bigger dangers ahead. He followed Nira into the tunnel with Zalaria just behind him. The air down here was stale, and the walls were damp with years of neglect. The light from the opening above quickly faded as they moved deeper into the darkness. This way, Nira said, her voice echoing through the tunnel. She seemed unafraid, despite the danger that loomed outside. She had grown up in this world with its hidden dangers and secrets. But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that even she didn't fully understand the gravity of what they were facing. As they moved deeper, the tunnel walls narrowed, forcing them to walk in single file. The air grew thick, and the distant hum of the alien ships above seemed to grow louder. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. How far to the caves? Marcus asked, his voice low. A few 100 meters, Zalaria replied. But we have to be careful. The caves are not safe. The enemy knows about them. They've used them before. Marcus's hand rested on the grip of his weapon. The last thing he wanted was to get cornered in a cave with no way out. But there was no turning back now. They had to keep moving. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the tunnel, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy alien footsteps. Marcus froze. He didn't need to look behind him to know they were being hunted. They're close, Marcus said, his voice tight. We need to move faster. Nira's eyes widened in fear, and even Zalaria's usually calm demeanor cracked for a moment, but they didn't stop. They kept moving, pushing through the tight tunnel, with the sound of the enemy's approach growing louder with each passing second. The pressure was on. There was no time left to hesitate. If they didn't reach the caves soon, they would be caught. Marcus gripped his weapon tighter, ready for whatever was coming next. This was just the beginning. The real fight had yet to come. The tunnel was narrow and dark, the walls closing in as they hurried through. The only light came from the faint glow of Nira's device, which she held in her hand. It flickered every few seconds, casting long, stretching shadows along the walls. The air was damp and heavy with dust, making it harder to breathe. Every step echoed in the silence, and the soft sound of footsteps behind them grew louder, closer. Marcus glanced over his shoulder, but all he could see was the blackness closing in on them. The sound of footsteps from the enemy grew more distinct, and the sense of urgency began to weigh heavier on Marcus's shoulders. They had to move faster. The walls of the tunnel seemed to close in tighter with each step, the air growing warmer and thicker. It felt like time was slipping away, and the sound of the alien soldiers was drawing near. Are we close? Marcus asked, his voice tight with the effort to keep moving. Nira in the lead didn't answer immediately. She only quickened her pace, her breath shallow. The closer they got to the caves, the more the sounds of pursuit intensified. It was clear that the enemy had been tracking them, using the same tunnels. The hairs on the back of Marcus's neck stood on end as his mind raced with possibilities. Zalaria, just behind Marcus, didn't speak either, but her presence was a constant reminder of the danger they faced. She had led them here, through the narrow corridors, trying to avoid the alien soldiers that hunted them. She, too, could hear the footsteps closing in. The tunnel finally began to widen, and the sound of rushing water echoed faintly in the distance. They had reached the edge of the caves. Nira slowed her pace, her device illuminating the opening in front of them. A series of large, jagged rocks and tight passages lay ahead, the passageway into the caves. They were almost there. We have to hurry, Nira said, her voice now filled with fear. Marcus could feel the pressure building inside him. The enemy was close. They were running out of time. Without looking back, he stepped forward, pushing past Nira and taking the lead. They couldn't afford to waste a second. The entrance to the caves was barely large enough to fit through. Marcus slid through first, his body brushing against the cold stone walls. The others followed close behind, Nira moving as fast as she could, with Zalaria right behind her. The sounds of their pursuers, now muffled by the walls, faded for a moment as the thick rock swallowed them whole. Once inside the caves, Marcus stopped to catch his breath. The air was cooler here, but the darkness was even more suffocating. The glow from Nira's device was the only thing that provided any sense of direction. The sound of water dripping echoed softly from somewhere deeper inside the caves. The further they moved into the darkness, the more claustrophobic it felt. They had no idea how long the caves stretched or what dangers lay hidden inside. "We need to find somewhere to hide," Marcus said, his voice low and urgent. He glanced over his shoulder, but there was no sign of the enemy yet. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He couldn't afford to let his guard down, not now. Nira nodded, her face pale in the dim light. She looked around, her eyes darting between the shadows. "There's a deeper part of the caves ahead. It's harder to find, but it's safe. I know the way." Zalaria spoke up, her voice calm but weary. "We must keep moving. The enemy knows these caves. They've used them before." She turned to Marcus, her eyes filled with a sense of urgency. "If they find us here, we won't survive. We have to go deeper." Marcus nodded, his heart racing as they moved forward once again. The sound of their footsteps was muffled by the damp earth beneath them, but the silence didn't bring comfort. It only made the weight more unbearable. They were moving deeper into the cave, each step taking them farther away from the safety of the outside world. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Marcus wasn't sure. The only sense of time came from the sound of his own breath and the occasional flicker of Nira's device. The tension between them was thick. They all knew the gravity of the situation. They couldn't afford to make a single mistake. They reached a narrow passageway, its entrance barely visible. Nira stepped forward, her hand brushing against the cold stone, and led them into the deeper part of the caves. The air grew colder here, and the echo of their movements grew faint as they ventured farther. "I used to come here when I was younger," Nira said quietly, almost as though she were speaking to herself. "It was a place to hide. No one could find you down here." Marcus could see the haunted look in her eyes, but there was no time to ask questions. He needed to focus. They were still being hunted, and they needed to find a place to stay hidden, away from their pursuers. They came to a small, cramped space, a narrow chamber that seemed to open up from the rock. It was surrounded by boulders and had just enough room for all three of them to sit, if only just. Nira's device cast eerie shadows across the walls as they huddled together. "We'll rest here for a moment," Marcus said, his voice low. "But we can't stay long." Zalaria looked at him, her expression grave. "We have no choice. The caves stretch for miles. We can move again when we're sure they're not close." Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of his decision. The time to act was coming soon. He couldn't afford to stay hidden forever, but in the moment, he had to rely on his instincts. The sounds of the distant alien soldiers were faint now, but still, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were getting closer. He scanned the shadows, keeping watch. His fingers brushed against the weapon at his side. It was a comfort, but he knew it wouldn't be enough if the enemy found them here. As the silence stretched on, Zalaria spoke again. "They won't stop. They'll search every inch of these caves until they find us." Marcus turned to her, his eyes sharp. "Then we'll make sure they regret it." His voice was steady, determined. "We're not going down without a fight." Zalaria looked at him, a flicker of understanding crossing her face. She knew that Marcus wasn't just talking about surviving. He was talking about fighting back. And in that moment, she understood why the human soldier had once saved her life. The same spirit that drove Marcus to fight was the same spirit that had saved her all those years ago. The three of them sat in the quiet darkness, each lost in their thoughts. The weight of what lay ahead was heavy, but they had no choice but to keep moving forward. The past had brought them together, but the future, whatever it held, was something they would face as one. They couldn't afford to lose this fight. Not now. Not when it was humanity's last chance to show the galaxy that they weren't just survivors. They were warriors. The silence in the cave grew heavier as the three of them sat huddled together, the sound of their breathing the only noise breaking the stillness. The walls felt like they were closing in around them, and every small sound seemed to echo louder than it should. Marcus, though trying to remain calm, felt his heart beat faster. They couldn't stay here for long. They couldn't afford to be found. Nira, sitting close by, gripped her knees tightly, her body trembling slightly. Her face, usually calm, was now filled with fear. Marcus could see it in her eyes. This was her home, the place she had known since she was young, yet now it seemed like a trap. She glanced over at him and then quickly looked away, her eyes unfocused. Zalaria, still standing, had her back pressed against the cave wall, her arms crossed. She was alert, watching the shadows around them as if the slightest movement would reveal their enemies. She, too, looked tired, but there was a determination in her face. She had lived through much more than this, and her past had taught her the value of staying one step ahead of those who sought to destroy her. Marcus felt the weight of his situation. He wasn't used to hiding. As a soldier, he had always been on the offensive, charging forward with his team by his side. But here, in this cold, damp cave, he was a stranger in someone else's fight. He wasn't just fighting for survival, he was fighting for trust. Trust that Zalaria and Nira would believe in him, that they would see him not just as a soldier, but as someone who understood what it meant to protect. He couldn't let them down. Zalaria broke the silence. Her voice was low but firm. "We need to move again. The enemy is getting closer. They won't stop searching until they find us. They've been hunting me for years. They won't give up now." Marcus stood up, dusting off his clothes. His mind raced with possibilities. He knew they couldn't outrun the enemy forever, but they had to try. They had to find a way to fight back, or they would be caught. It wasn't just about survival anymore. They had to stand their ground. "I'll lead the way," Marcus said, his voice steady. He turned to Nira. "Can you guide us to the deeper caves, the ones you mentioned?" Nira looked at him, her eyes wide with uncertainty. "Yes, but it's dangerous. I haven't been there in years. I don't know what's in there anymore." "We don't have a choice," Marcus replied. He turned to Zalaria. "Can you defend yourself if it comes to that?" Zalaria nodded. "I can hold my ground, but it's not about fighting them. It's about staying one step ahead. We need to move quickly and quietly." Marcus nodded. The plan was clear: escape first, fight only if necessary. He motioned for them to follow him, and they began moving deeper into the cave. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the silence became. The cave was darker now, and the air was colder. The only light came from Nira's device, which flickered weakly. They walked in single file, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The sound of their footsteps, muted by the damp earth beneath them, was the only sign that they were still moving. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every so often, he would glance over his shoulder, as if expecting to see the enemy lurking in the shadows. The cave felt like a maze, with twists and turns that led to places he couldn't see. His sense of direction was failing him. All he could rely on was Nira and Zalaria's knowledge of the tunnels. Eventually, they reached another narrow passage. Nira hesitated at the entrance, looking down at the ground. Her hands were shaking, but she didn't speak. Zalaria moved up behind her and placed a hand on her shoulder, giving her a reassuring squeeze. "It's okay," Zalaria said softly. "We're not far now." Marcus looked around. The tunnel was low and tight, forcing them to crouch as they moved forward. It felt like they were traveling deeper into the earth, into a place where no one had set foot for centuries. He had no idea what dangers lay ahead, but they had no choice but to keep moving. As they walked, the faint sound of running water reached their ears. It echoed through the cave, bouncing off the walls. The air grew colder, and Marcus felt the chill seep into his bones. The further they went, the more distant the sounds of pursuit became. He hoped it meant the enemy was losing their trail, but he wasn't sure. Nira led them through the dark, the flickering light from her device guiding their path. Every now and then, she would pause to check the walls, looking for something, perhaps a marker or sign that would guide them further into the cave system. Zalaria followed closely behind, her eyes scanning the surroundings, ever watchful. After what felt like an eternity, they arrived at a small, hidden alcove. The air in this part of the cave was thick and heavy with moisture. The faint sound of water trickling in the distance was louder here. Nira stopped and turned to Marcus, her face pale. "This is it," she said. "We can rest here for a while. It's a safe spot. Or at least it used to be." Marcus surveyed the area. It was a small chamber with a shallow pool of water in the center. The walls were damp, covered with moss and lichen. There was just enough space for them to sit, but it wasn't much. Still, it was better than being exposed out in the open. Zalaria stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the alcove. "We can't stay here for long," she said. "The enemy could find us at any moment. They'll search every inch of these caves until they find us." Marcus nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. They were still not safe, but for now they needed a moment to gather themselves to figure out their next move. The escape route Nira had suggested was still their best chance, but they couldn't afford to take any more chances. They had to be smart about it. Nira sat down by the edge of the pool, her legs crossed, her head hanging low. "I wish I knew what to do," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "I don't want to keep running." Marcus crouched down beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We won't keep running. We'll figure this out. We just need to be patient." Zalaria stood apart from them, her eyes fixed on the tunnel entrance. "The longer we stay here, the more dangerous it becomes. We need to move again soon, but first we need to make sure we're not followed." Marcus stood up, walking over to Zalaria. "We can't keep running forever. Sooner or later we'll have to fight back." Zalaria turned to him, her eyes filled with something that could only be described as quiet determination. "If it comes to that, we will fight. But only when we're ready. We're not out of danger yet." Marcus looked at her, his resolve hardening. "We'll be ready." The moment of silence that followed felt like it lasted far too long. The cool air in the cave was thick with the weight of their uncertainty. Marcus sat quietly, his back against the cave wall, his mind racing with possible plans. Zalaria was still standing, scanning the entrance of the alcove, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Nira was sitting near the edge of the shallow pool, her hands resting in her lap, her mind clearly somewhere else. "We can't stay here for long," Zalaria spoke, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. She knew that time was running out. Marcus turned his attention to her, his face set in determination. "I know, but we need a plan. The deeper we go into these caves, the more risks we take. We can't outrun them forever. We'll have to fight back when the time comes." Zalaria didn't look at him immediately. She continued to watch the narrow tunnel entrance, the darkness beyond it. "You don't understand," she said softly. "Fighting them will only make things worse. They'll come after us with everything they have. It's not just about survival anymore, it's about the choices we make." Marcus stood up, his legs stiff from sitting too long. "And what choices do we have left? We can't keep hiding, Zalaria. They'll find us eventually, and when they do, we'll be trapped. We need to be ready to face them, not just run and hope they give up." Zalaria's gaze finally shifted toward him. "I know what you mean, but you don't understand the stakes here. If we fight, if we're seen as enemies, they'll bring their full force. It won't just be us. It'll be every human they can find. They'll hunt your kind, they'll wipe out anyone they think is connected to me. There's too much at risk." Marcus was silent for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. He understood now, it wasn't just about saving themselves. It was about something much bigger. If they fought, they would be putting not just their lives on the line, but the lives of countless others. The stakes had always been high, but now it seemed like everything was hanging by a thread. "We don't have many choices, do we?" he said quietly. "No," Zalaria replied, her voice resigned but steady. "We don't, but we still have time to think, we still have time to decide." Nira had been silent up until now, but her voice broke through the quiet air. "How long can we keep running, though? How long before they find us again?" Her question hung in the air like a cloud. Marcus could feel the tension growing inside the cave. They were being hunted, but the longer they waited to act, the more desperate the situation would become. "We can't stay here much longer," Marcus said firmly. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew they needed to move. "We need to get to a better position, find some kind of escape route. We can't let them trap us in here." Zalaria nodded slowly, her expression softening. "You're right, we'll move again, but we need to be careful. Every step we take now has to be planned." They spent a few more moments in silence, considering their options. Marcus knew that they couldn't stay in the alcove for much longer. The longer they lingered, the more likely it was that the enemy would find them. They had to move, and they had to move now. "Let's go," Marcus said, standing up again and motioning for Zalaria and Nira to follow him. Nira stood up with a start, her eyes wide with worry. "Where are we going? The tunnels are too dangerous. We'll never make it through." Marcus gave her a reassuring look, trying to calm her fears. "We'll make it through, but we need to move now. We're sitting ducks here." Zalaria gave a slight nod of agreement and then turned, leading the way into the dark tunnel. The light from Nira's device flickered weakly, casting long shadows along the jagged rock walls. The air in the tunnel grew cooler and damper as they ventured deeper, each step echoing louder than the last. They didn't speak much as they moved, each of them lost in their thoughts, focused only on getting as far away from their enemies as possible. The oppressive silence was only broken by the occasional drip of water echoing from the deeper parts of the cave. After what seemed like hours, they arrived at another small chamber. This one was quieter, and the air felt fresher. Marcus breathed deeply, taking in the scent of earth and stone, trying to clear his mind. Zaleria turned to him, her face tense. "We need to decide now, Marcus. Do we keep running or do we prepare to fight?" Marcus thought for a moment. The weight of their situation was pressing on him. They couldn't run forever, and fighting felt like the only option left. But he also understood the risks. If they fought, it wasn't just their lives they were gambling with. It was the lives of everyone they knew. "We don't have the luxury of time," Marcus finally said. "We'll prepare for a fight, but we need to be smart about it. We find a place to defend ourselves, and then we wait for the right moment." Zaleria seemed to consider his words carefully. "And if the right moment doesn't come? Then we make it ourselves," Marcus replied. His voice was steady, his resolve growing with each word. "We'll fight when we're ready, not before." Zaleria didn't argue. She seemed to accept his decision, the quiet understanding passing between them. They had no other choice but to keep going. They found a small alcove deeper into the caves, one that seemed more secure. It was hidden behind a rock outcrop, its entrance barely large enough for them to fit through. Inside, it was darker, but it felt safer. The narrow opening gave them a sense of being shielded from the world outside. They settled in, taking what little rest they could, their eyes constantly darting to the entrance, waiting for any sign of movement. The cave was quiet, save for the occasional drip of water from the walls. Nira had fallen asleep sitting up, her head resting against the stone, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Zaleria, however, was still wide awake, her gaze focused on the shadows outside. Marcus sat across from her, his back against the wall, his eyes scanning their surroundings. His mind was still working, still thinking ahead. They couldn't afford to make any mistakes. If they were going to survive this, they had to be ready for anything. As the night wore on, Marcus could feel the tension building. The quiet of the cave felt almost too still. He knew they were being hunted, but the quiet made it feel like they were being watched from the darkness. Every slight noise made his heart race. The enemy was out there. They were close, he could feel it in his bones. The hours passed and still no sign of the enemy. The night seemed endless, each minute stretching longer than the last. Marcus couldn't relax, couldn't allow himself to. He knew that the moment he did, the enemy would strike. Zaleria leaned back against the wall, her eyes finally closing for a moment. "We'll be ready," she whispered, almost to herself. Marcus nodded, but in his heart he knew that their time was running out. Soon they would have to face their enemies. And when that moment came, they would need to fight with everything they had.